All right. Well, we need to do some masking fluids. Oh, do you guys want to bring your pictures up?
Yeah, just so we can figure out where we're going to do it.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of different textures there that we have to deal with, right? So we're going to be creating the flowers using salt, and we're going to do a bit of spattering too. In a couple of different ways. And so you've got some grasses there, right? So I'm going to show you guys a couple of different tools you can use, and can I borrow your photo? Great. So what if, like in this one, I have a whole bunch of dandelions, right? So maybe I want to do some foreground ones. I just mean your photo. I don't really need the painting.
Perfect.
So one way is to use a brush, and just a cheap brush, like a white nylon hair, and use some masking fluid. Okay. But one of the things, even with buying a cheap brush, it's nice to extend the life of it, because this is basically liquid rubber that we put on the page, let it dry, and then when we paint over it, and it resists and keeps that area. Generally, it's usually put on first to keep it white. In this case, we want to keep the page yellow, right? Like the yellow highlights of these grasses or the yellow flowers. So, and even with a cheap brush, it's still nice to have it last for a little while. So a little trick is to dip your brush in a little bit of liquid soap, and then just blot some of it off. You don't want too much soap, but it just sort of coats the bristles a little bit so that it keeps your brush cleaner for a little bit longer. And then just dip in the masking fluid, and then I could draw where I want some of these yellow flowers. So if you have some things that you want to mask off in the foreground, you can do that. So if they're bigger flowers or flowers with more shape, maybe they were daisies, you want to draw some of those. So the soap is nice. It just, keeps a little bit longer life to your brush. So it takes a little patience. Now the other thing we can do, and then just rinse it with water. So masking fluid, you want to put it on a dry page always. Don't put it on a damp page because it might absorb into the fibers and it won't come off. There's lots of sort of do's and don'ts, and in the handouts I gave you guys, there's a list of do's and don'ts with masking fluid, because it's tricky stuff sometimes. So you put it on, you want it to dry. You want to make sure it's dry before you paint on it. You don't want that stuff stuck in a good brush. And you want to make sure that when you take it off the page again, that the page is dry. Don't let it freeze. Don't let it get hot. Don't leave it on your page for years, because it won't come off after several years. So it's one of those things you think you're going to get back to that painting, and you don't. I've had it happen. You can't sit in the direct sunlight and use masking fluid. It'll bake onto the page. Wow. All these things I found out the hard way. Then you might have to too, but it is on your list. So we can use a brush. Some people like to just use like a stick or something and just draw with it, right? I find it doesn't work very well, but this thing does. This is a ruling pen, and you can use it to draw with the watercolor as well. But it works really well for fine detail, and then I don't have to worry about it with getting clogged up with rubber, because it's just a metal prong. So I just dip into it, and then I can draw some grasses. Oh, cool. And I can do really thin lines. So I like this for things like cat whiskers, and I've done bird feathers this way. So this might be a nice way to do some of those grasses. And you can change the thickness of the line. You just tighten up the screw.
What's the name of that utensil?
It's called a ruling pen. Mine's kind of stuck. Tighten it for thick lines, or sorry, tighten it for thin lines and loosen it up to get a thicker line. So, and then you can either rinse it off or let it dry, and then the rubber just pulls right off the metal. So that would be a nice way for you to do some of these. You could paint some of those sort of wheat heads, or you could do it with the ruling pen.
There's
So.
like this in the background.
Yeah, some of that we can lift off as well, but you could do. Yeah. I suppose you could experiment with other things that would draw the fluid on. Like I wonder, a bristly brush or something might work. I'd like to spatter on a few of the flowers too. So I want to cover up the top part of my sky so I don't get any on it. I can use a stiff brush like this and spatter like that. I can use a toothbrush, which is what we've already learned, right? So anytime you're rinsing out your brush, I want you to be mindful that if there's water in the brush, that you need to soak out the excess water. You don't want to dilute the masking fluid. And it's too diluted, it can absorb into the fibers of the paper, and then it doesn't come off. That's why it always should be on a dry page when you put it on, so it doesn't absorb into the fibers. So I just want a little bit. So I don't like to dunk the whole brush, because then you get so much, you'll end up getting gobs. And it takes a long time to dry. So with this method, I hold some kind of straight, stiff element like this plastic palette knife or butter knife, and I'm just going to strike just like that. Now, old toothbrushes make great painting tools. There, so I just put some of a little fine spray in the distance too, and I could be really light in the distance so that it makes finer sprays, so I can get a bit more sense of perspective. And then I might pick up a little more or put more on the brush and then hit harder in the foreground so I get bigger dots. I need more though. And that way we get a sense of perspective, right? Smells nasty, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used it because I did my Aurora Borealis at home. I put my own starters on, and I was struck by the smell of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got ammonia in it to keep it liquid.
Mm. Yeah, I wondered what.
Yeah, that's what the smell is. Yeah. When you rinse your brush in that water, make sure you discard that water. Do not put your good watercolor brush in there. That stuff is the enemy of a good brush. So you could choose to do that. You don't have to. There's other ways, but I think it helps because sometimes the salt works to varying degrees. So it's sometimes nice to have a way to keep some of the flowers there, right?
So is this a salt effect in this example, or is this mixed technique?
That's salt.
Great.
Painting every single one is is slow, so it's certainly a lot easier to spatter, and you can even just add a few by hand. All right, so that's our next stage. So I'd like you guys to do any masking that you want to do. You can borrow the ruling pen if you want for your grasses there. There's other ways we can make textures too, though, and that's part of what we're going to learn tonight, okay? So you can go borrow that.
I didn't get myself any masking.
That's okay, because I have some. Yep. if you have a little spot in your tray, you can just pour some in there or use the container itself, whatever you like. There's an extra toothbrush here and palette knives if you guys need them. Okay. And I think since some of you folks might be watching, last week I tried to record it and I ran out of battery. So the broadcast suddenly ended. So we were learning how to paint skies last week. And the trees, we did this method, controlled blooming, where we create blooming on purpose by having, what I did is I let the sky sort of dry a bit so that it was damp, and then put a lot of moisture on the trees. You get these wonderful wiggly lines developing. Here's some nice examples of blooming. I did this painting on the weekend and in a sunset workshop, and used some blooming on purpose in the clouds to create some really wonderful wild cloud formations for the sunset. Here's a nice example too. Look at this. This wiggly edge here, that's blooming. So the page here was damp. This color here was put on really wet, and then it runs to the damp edge and makes this wiggly line. And I challenge you to try to draw a line with your brush that wonderful. Look at this, isn't that great? So this is wet paint running into this wet paint. So this is wetter than that, and it looks like grass is growing. So it's really nice techniques. If you can do a watercolor painting where you let the water do the work for you. So here, see, this is controlled blooming to make the crown of that tree there and here. So the nice place to use it to this line of grasses compared to the field and behind, it creates that wiggly edge. You can use it for the edges of flower petals too. Just a wonderful technique. So what these ladies are going to do tonight, we're going to learn how to do the salt technique. We're going to be doing both for the flowers here. We're going to be doing salt to create some sense of foliage. Like in this example, some of the foreground shrubberies are done that way. This is a nice example of the salt making the wildflowers. We're going to be doing bruising for the grasses and lifting off or scratching off. We're going to do some spatter painting too. So some of these flowers were spattered on. You can see all these textures, right, of how we can create these textures. And a book I really love, and I wish it was still in print, I would completely have it on my Amazon store if it were, but you can find it used sometimes, so look around for it. Watercolor Made Simple with Claudia Nice. She does have lots of excellent books that are still in print. One of the things I like about this book, well, there's so many things I love about it, but she teaches you how to stretch, all about the color, some basic color theory, and really shown quite well visually, explaining the 6 primaries, your earth colors, how to mix those 6 primaries, how to mix with complementary colors, like how a yellow banana with violet looks so much better than using Payne's gray or black. How to mix browns. Love this portion on greens. So the color section is good. And then she goes through all the basic techniques. And we're going to be learning the texture techniques today. So here's some of the masking fluid techniques we just looked at. And then we're going to get into, and they've been learning, the students have been learning how to do gradations and using different colors. Learning how to glaze paints, we've been doing that. And now we're getting into textures. Let's see, I've used this book a lot over the years. So using a sponge to make textures. Water droplets, we're going to do a bit of that. Using a spritzer bottle, painting with straw. Here's what we're going to learn tonight, bruising and scraping off. Look at that, saran wrap meets watercolor. Look at that, isn't that cool what you can do for water? This is some spatter painting to make the rust. So this is what our main part we're learning tonight is the salt technique. And what I like about this author's book is how she shows the whole range of how it can look and what reaction we're looking for, what happens when we go too soon or too soon or too late, like really wet versus more dry. Although sometimes we can do this quite on purpose. So it's not just necessarily a mistake. I want it to look like this. So how would I get that to happen? Use a lot of salt. Rock salt. This is the water bubbles by using alcohol, rubbing alcohol, so it works great. So lots of good ideas in that book. So even if you can't find this one, see if you can find a book that covers that kind of thing. You guys getting all your masking done? All right, so you can see the masking fluid on here, little blue drops. Anywhere where there's still a little bit of white or milky look, it's not dry yet. So it's really important that you wait for that to dry completely before we start painting. So.
The nice thing is I've realized that because I have wider sections, I actually can have.
You could have some white flowers and some yellow flowers. Yeah, that's great. Let's see. Pause this. Just gonna bring this a little closer. You can see there's the blue dots of the masking fluid there. Now I've been mixing up some colors for this. Let this dry. So I've been mixing up various colors before I start. I've got a bit of cad red, I've got gamboge yellow, and I've got a hooker's green here. I took hooker's green and I added some yellow, and then I added some of the red to it because I want to have a more natural looking green. Because colors out of the tube do not look natural. So like what this color looked like out of the tube, really bright and fake looking. So don't use your greens right out of the tube. Mix in some of the complementary color. So, and if you buy a book that has some explanation of that, so here we have a section on greens. So you can change the green in your tube or mix one. So if I want to make a nice green, so let's say I want to make a clean green. Might want a cool yellow like lemon yellow and a cool blue like a greenish blue. So I might want to use phthalo. And then I get a nice true bright green. What if I want a dirty, more muted green? I could take a warm yellow like Cad Yellow Deep and a warmer blue, one that's a little more violet like ultramarine blue, and I'll get an olive green. The other thing I could do is start with my pure mixture and then add the complementary color to make it more dull. So if we look at mixing greens here, so I start with green. So I might have a base of sap green I can buy or make one out of, say, phthalo and aureolin yellow. It might be a really nice combo. And then I can add other colors to it to make a variety of greens. I could add some orange. I could add some blue to soften that green. I can add violet to get sort of muted tones of greens. I can brighten it up by adding more yellow. I can make it more dull and olive by adding a red. So start with a base green and adjust it. Burnt sienna does a nice job of changing greens too. In fact, even phthalo blue mixed with burnt sienna makes a beautiful, deep, kind of evergreen green color. So remembering we start with a base green and then add some red or orange. Make it a shadowy, soft green with violet. So never just use your greens out of the tube. So you want to do a little bit of pre-mixing first on your palette, as well having some pure colors. So it's good to have some pure yellow and some pure blues so that we can let the colors kind of play together on the page and not just have everything kind of, you know, just pre-mixed. It's too boring. It's nice for watercolor to let colors run together and not have everything completely separated. So let's say I want to make a green that's more natural. And it's water here. I've got masking fluid in my water. Almost dipped my good brush in there. Bad idea. So you see how here it changed Hooker's green or Viridian green. Viridian looks, it's a great mixing color, but it's so, don't use it out of the tube. It looks bad. You definitely want to add some yellow and some kind of red to it. So here I've mixed up, this is sap green, and it's really bright. That's beautiful. If I want to make it more dull, I'm going to add a bit of maybe alizarin crimson or permanent rose. So a more magenta kind of red to it to make that a little more natural. So already that softened it and made it more natural, and I could add even more if I want to soften it some more and get an olive green. You see there, I get more natural looking colors. You guys ready yet to see the next stage, or still draw? Yeah.
So how thick does the masking fluid have to be to cover it?
Usually the consistency it is in the bottle is good. Now it can get thick with age, right? So it should be similar to latex paint, I guess. Like it's fluid. It needs to be able to
Like how
much coverage?
Yeah.
You don't want to put it on too thick because then it just takes too long to dry. But as long as it's covered, you know, it can be quite thin and it'll still work. But you don't want to add water to it and thin it out, because then there's too much moisture and it can absorb into the page. We want it to sit on top. Generally, if you have a relatively new bottle, the thickness that it is in the bottle is good. Just sort of a medium amount on there is fine. But don't put it on really thick, even though it'd be fine. It's just that you're waiting too long. But you could.
Thinly.
You can put it on thinly. You can put it on more thick, but it doesn't really matter. It's going to cover it. Something to avoid is to shake the bottle to mix it. Like if you shake it vigorously, you get air bubbles. And if you're trying to cover a big area, you might have little air pocket bubbles, and the color will get through those. So there is usually a tint so that you can see it going on, especially when you're on a clean white page. So there's either they're tinted a bit yellow or they're tinted blue, so you can see them. So if you just tip your bottle kind of back and forth to mix that color through rather than shaking vigorously, that's good. Over time, it can get a bit thick and it won't flow. So you can add a little bit of water, a little bit of household ammonia to thin it back out. If you get clumps that sometimes near the top, it's congealed, you might want to like pull out the congealed part and see if it's good underneath. If it's not, add a little bit of ammonia, a little bit of water, and mix it up, and that'll kind of continue the lifespan of your bottle. Okay. So we're going to learn a bunch of different methods for making a variety of textures today. So when you guys are ready, you can come on over here to see some different ideas of how to make textures.
I'm gonna mask, but at a later time when I've got some green, because I've got grain stems and stuff, not so much.
Ah, so you're gonna, yeah, so you know, because a lot of times people think, I just put the masking fluid on a white page. Like here's an example, right? These little daisies were masked off on the white page. And a lot of times people think that's what I do with masking fluid. And yes, that's true. Or this artist here, she masked off the roofs. These are going to be barns, and she masked off the roofs of the buildings. But she did it through at different stages. Do you notice that?
Yes.
So she masked off a bunch of them, painted the yellow, took the masking fluid off, and
she's remasked
and then remasked certain areas. Then she allowed, then she, it's like batik. Then she put a red layer on, right? Allowed it to cover that roof. Yeah. And these ones, this part stayed white. She kept the white masking fluid on the whole time. Yep. Right? So she was sort of selectively masking and taking off as she went through the layers, and eventually ends up with that. So this is glaze painting. So isn't that amazing that these grays were done through layers of paint? So doing optical mixing. But isn't that gray a very alive gray? You sort of see that hint of yellow under there.
Yeah.
Right? So that, you know, it makes a much more beautiful and alive painting, even to these subtle colors when we glaze paint. It's not everybody's cup of tea, you know, to do, because it takes a lot of patience and understanding what's going to happen through the layers. But one of the things that's nice about this, you get some sophisticated color, and through the layers, and each layer she's still doing fairly quickly and loosely, but has that sophistication to it. But it takes a lot of planning. So not everybody has the patience to do that, though. A lot of people would rather, what can I do in one go? I'm done. But watercolor is nice because it's transparent, that you can do that kind of thing, right? And that's from my second favorite book. And I don't have it with me today, but it's from a book called Making Colors Sing with Jean Dobie. Really superb book. And if you love watercolor, I think that's a must buy, because of the way she uses color and the lessons on how to really make a strong painting. Okay, so we've got some colors mixed and we're ready to start. Generally in a landscape watercolor, we're going to start at the back and work our way forward. And that's pretty typical of many landscape paintings, even in other media. And one of the things we were learning about last week, we were saying that things in the background tend to look a little bit softer. Colors tend to be more grayed out or more blue. Blue and violet recedes more, so we can also create space with it. But the pure color, we only can see that when it's closer to us. Something about the wavelengths that just can't get that far. Maybe it's because we've got air and pollution between us and the thing in the far distance, that colors in the distance look more muted. So that I don't want to put my super bright green back there. I'm going to want to use a more muted green. So, and I wonder what photo I was basing this on. I was looking at it.
I think you were doing a bit of,
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm all for go paint outside, right? And go look at real things and take your photos and all of that, all the better. I do find sometimes in classes it's handy to use photos, but it's always so much better to paint from life because somebody else, I was talking to another prof and she was saying to me, when you use a photograph, there's been all these creative decisions already made for you. Right. Like, where were you going to crop? What do you include? What do you not include? Right. So the composition's already been kind of decided. And, you know, or you don't really understand your subject the way you would if you're there with it, looking behind it, smelling it, all those things. That when you paint in a live setting, there's so much more of the mood of the place and how you felt when you were there. Somehow those things can come across in a painting, and you don't feel that from a photo. It might be easier to paint from a photo, but it's not usually as rich an experience for you, and it somehow comes across in the painting. So one of the things I'm wanting to do here is maybe soften my colors a bit, like add a little bit of blue, add a little bit more of the complementary colors. They do find somehow in watercolor classes when we're in a classroom, photos are handy as a place for learning. And then I really recommend that you get out there and, you know, try it. Maybe you're up at the cottage or you're on a little holiday or even just out in your backyard. Go to a local park and set up in the shade. It does help for watercolor to set up in the shade. So in the back, I want soft, simple textures. I don't want softer colors. I don't want a lot of variation when and in the background. And I don't want too much texture, really. Keep it more simple because I can't see all of that in the background, right? So that's pretty straightforward, just kind of paint it on. And now, and if you notice too, when you look at fields, there's kind of layers, if you will, right? And so we can use that sort of blooming thing again. Say I'm going to paint one stripe of land in the back and then let that get to the stage where it's damp and then paint the next stripe, and then I get that wonderful wiggly line. That's quite a nice technique. So now it looks, the next thing, it looks kind of ochre. So I mixed up my own ochre. I actually prefer mixing my own colors. Like after reading Jean Dobie's book, I really enjoy saying, you know, I could make an ochre that's more alive than using yellow ochre, because I could use transparent colors. So I just used the gamboge that I had and added some magenta and a bit of violet. So I'm going to paint that on. If I want to encourage a little bit of blooming, I could try to paint into that area a bit.
Just so the paint loosens a bit.
And just scrub that edge because it was a little bit hard. And then I'd want to, yeah, I'm starting to get some blooming now. I'm going to be showing you a few different techniques for you guys to just play around with. And I think watercolor really is one of those things, I think it just takes practice and letting yourself explore and play around with it a bit. 80% of our learning is doing. And it's so much, almost, I mean, anything you do, but I find so much, particularly in art, Oh my gosh, you just got to do it, you know, because people are always, what about this? What about that? Just do it. Just play with it. I mean, I do really help people. Oh, turn your brush on this angle, and it helps. So there are some good tips, but until you just get in there and try it, you don't really know. So one of the things, you see how I had that hard line, and I really had to work to get rid of it. So one of the things you might want to consider, if you know you're going to be painting in a series of layers, that maybe you're going to drag the side of your brush. Give yourself a rough edge, right? Instead of a hard line. And then while that's wet, I can drop some other colors into it. So I'm going to drop some olive green I mixed into that. I'm going to drop a bit of stronger ochre. And pick up a bit of magenta to let it fall in there. So letting the paint kind of work on the page. So, and you might notice I'm kind of dragging the side of my brush to create some texture. And I want some olive green in there too. So the first thing is we're creating some textures by sort of uneven. So, you know, a lot of the time we've been working on even moisture. Right now let's make uneven moisture. So if we want smooth textures and predictability, we want similar moisture on the page as to on the brush. When we want to create texture, we want different levels of moisture and playing with different timings. And we want to create that quite on purpose. Okay. So far it's kind of some wet areas, somewhere we might drag the brush sideways so it skips. Let that dry and then rub a different color into it. So I'm going to show you that with green so it's a little easier to see. And if I let that dry, I could then rub over that after it's dry with, say, yellow. So far, and you see I've got some blooming through the layers happening. If I want more, I let that evaporate a bit until it's just a little bit damp. And then come in with another color through there to create some blooming. I really want it to happen more. I'm going to add some extra moisture so that it will encourage it, right? And I could also change the color as I go so it's not static, right? So shift it. So it's kind of nice. So that's good for the background. Just dragging your brush sideways, letting different colors blend together. A little bit of kind of not exactly classical dry brushing, but just scuffing the page with the side of your brush so it skips over that texture. So that's a good approach for this portion of the background, not the far ground, but sort of, I don't know, mid-ground, I guess. Then we're going to create more textures in here and detail in the foreground, okay? So the first thing I want you to try is this kind of thing. Now, if you happen to have, let's say there's some shrubs or trees back here too. I'd like to show you, so I'm going to show you one more layer. So that's good for back there. Then I want to show you what else you could do. So into this area, I might come with a bit of yellow. And I might let some green blend into that. So one thing I could do, I'm going to do this really lightly back here because I don't want too much detail there. So really, really soft and small lines. And this can drag one color into the next color area. We're definitely doing that in the foreground. You can also, to create a grassy look like this painting has. So this was blooming here. This was really wet paint running into the next area. So that can create a sense of grasses growing, right? And shrubs. So if I came underneath that with wet, and a tilt to the page can help. And again, it has to be lots of moisture into a wet area, right? Might need a bit more water in there. You can introduce, if it's not kind of fingering off, introduce a little extra water onto the page so that it runs, right? And some gravity. And it's never quite a science. It definitely is an art. And that's one thing about watercolor. You kind of have to get used to. I sort of have control, but not complete control. You're guiding and you're hoping you'll get the effect you want, but you never know for sure. So it didn't quite go as well as I had hoped. So I'm going to introduce another technique right here. We said we were going to learn about salt today, right? Oh, yeah. And we're going to do that for our flowers, but we can also do it here if I want to make some small shrubs. So if I want to create textures for foliage, I want to put the salt on when it's more wet, and so more flow. You can see it's kind of shiny there. So if I want just a texture, I can have the page having a shine and some fairly strong color, and I can put quite a lot on, and this will make a little shrub.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I think I could have had some stronger color there for it to really show, so I'm going to put some extra on here and make a little shrub right here. I put it on kind of strong. I might add a little bit of shadow. Oops, that's a little much. Shadow in there. And then drop some salt on it. In fact, I think I want a little bit of yellow too. So it makes kind of wild patterns. It just leaves some texture, so it can look like a shrub.
So it absorbs, the salt absorbs the liquid and then pulls the paint around its crystalline shape. So it clusters.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so that can be a nice technique. Like even, let's say this photo here, if I want to make textures for those trees, I could do layers of controlled blooming through there, just have to, keep coming down, or I could sprinkle some salt on it to create some of those textures. Also spattering can work well. So for now, that's not bad. Thing that you could do to start some texture. We could also decide, hey, maybe we want to do a bit of spattering for the distance here. So it's a couple of different ways you can do spattering. You could use a stiff bristle kind of brush like this. I want to cover up the sky. I've ruined so many paintings by forgetting that. And just fairly simple, just flick off of your finger. Then you could put a variety of different colors on there. And got some on there a lot stronger than I meant to. So So I'm gonna have to do something about those, aren't I? I could soak them off. That's one thing I could do. And I think the best way to soak it off is probably just with the tip of a brush.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
That's what's nice about sable brushes. They're absorbent.
So absorbent.
You could take just the tip of a Kleenex. Oh, if you don't have one. Just lighten that up so it doesn't look out of place. Right? So don't, if you get it before it dries, nothing to worry about. All right. So I'd like you guys to go and try the sort of background and mid-ground section of it. Then we'll be learning more detailed methods and more significant texturing methods as we come into the foreground. And for the salt, you just have to wait. You don't get to see what it does for a little while. Let's see here. We look in Claudia's book. Here's a section. So here's the salt techniques. And then there's another nice section on painting foliage. Let's see if I can find that. In our second level course we do at the Guelph School of Art, here we go. You see what they did here? This is with salt to create those shrubs. Isn't that nice? Yeah. And look at how they made the branches too, and with a straw. So
yeah, rolling through the straw.
yeah, it's trickier than it looks. Takes a little practice actually get that just right. Even though there are things to do when we're kids to make it look good in an adult painting takes a bit of practice. So those are kind of cool things, right? So the students are going to do some painting there, and we're going to do a bit more to this. Let's see, should I do anything else? You know, I'd like to see a little more texture through here and more sense of the yellow flowers. So I think I'm going to put some more yellow in here. So I could maybe dry brush some yellow on here. The other thing I think I'd like to do is spatter some yellow into that area. Just going to cover up the part I don't want. And here's another way to spatter. You can round brush, fill it with some paint, strike the handle of the round brush, handle of another one. So here's another spattering method, guys. I thought I needed more of a sense of flowers, the yellow flower texture. So I'm spattering like this. And I can also kind of try to direct it where I want it in lines like this by having my brush sort of parallel to the area that, you know, the lay of the land, right? Bigger dots, hit it harder, more paint on your brush, smaller dots, tap it really lightly, less paint on the brush. Kind of logical. Great. I'm going to pause this broadcast here because I'm going to go and help you guys. Now, let's see. It's kind of far away. I should try to get a little closer to this. So, so yes, so the voice you've been hearing, this is me. I'm Karen, known as the admissions insider, because 100% of my students get accepted. But people just want to tune in sometimes and just see some of what a painting class is like with me. And this one happens to be watercolor painting, but I teach all kinds of different subjects in the visual arts. And if you want to see more of how to finish this painting, yeah, we've got a few class members that missed tonight, and they're going to be able to tune in and catch up. So tune in a little bit later if you want to see this painting getting finished. I'm going to go help these guys paint now. Thanks for watching.